Okay, now the actual show starts. Welcome to Classical Studies 101. Anybody recognize the building we're looking at here?
I think I want to say it's Athena's temple.
It totally is. Does anybody know the name of it?
The Acropolis?
Yes, so the building, the hill it's sitting on is the Acropolis, which literally just means the high city. So that is like the high point in Athens, and it was then too as well. It is the temple of Athena. It has a specific name, which you might not know. Actually, you probably recognize it. It's called the Parthenon. Yes, there's actually about 3 or 4 temples to Athena, which isn't surprising because it's Athens. Parthenon means the temple of the Virgin. And so there are various aspects of Athena's divinity that get worshipped individually, and they actually have their own separate temple. So there's Athena of the Polis, that's a separate temple. Athena Victory, no, that's a separate temple. We wouldn't think of splitting up a personality or into all that spot and all those different variations. Anyway, so I will generally do this each lecture. What are we going to do today? Some basic useful information, course objectives, individual goals, the structure, ground rules, sometimes those surprise people, and then the actual content part. We'll talk a little bit about Greek alphabet and language and figuring out BC and AD. I don't know how much you guys have had to navigate through that in high school. Or BCE and at CE. And then any questions people have, and I will hand out the assignment. These, by the way, are called caryatids. If you're into Dr. Seuss, that was funny. Thing 1 and thing 2. Anyway, just a little bit about me first. So my main area is actually Roman history, but also Greek comedy. Also interested in sport and athletics, which the Greeks were really into. Epigraphy, which is all the inscriptions that have survived from the ancient world. Roman numismatics, or their coinage. And Latin and tattoos, which is probably one you didn't expect to see in the list of what is my instructor into. I used to do Latin consultation, translations for I thought when I started it off, it would be like translations for academics, students who were struggling. 90% of the requests were, I want to put this English phrase on me permanently in Latin. And I don't want it to look stupid or be wrong. Can you help me out? Yeah. And I've taught at Brock, Mac, both in Ontario, UBC, here, and Simon Fraser. And I've actually had some fun doing some TV and movie consultation. Anyway, and I always like to enjoy classics. So here, actual piece of pottery. It's, I think, considered to be Ajax and Odysseus. But I'd like to add a little text in here. Just to show that I'm not making it up when I say that people like to put Latin on themselves. There are some examples, right? Carpe diem, I think a number of people may know that seize the day. Cogito ergo sum is actually medieval. I think, therefore I am. The bottom one, if you look at it and you don't know any Latin at all, it should still strike you as weird because there's English in it. And it's kind of interspersed. Yes?
Is it from the Bible?
Yes, it totally is. Do you know which bit?
Lo, though I walk through the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you.
Yes.
And so on.
Yes, that's it. It's the 23rd Psalm. I got to share this with you. Somebody, and this is like real, this is on somebody forever, and this is why asking advice is good. It is, lo, though I walk. The person who went and Google translated this put a typo in the English. This word sententia doesn't mean though, it's thought. So they typed it in wrong and they put in thought, though they put in thought. Oh, sententia, that must mean though. Yeah. And then at some point they just got bored and stuck in some English. Yeah. This might be the most, I hate to be judgmental, but like the level of dumbness is huge. There's a second tattoo that has this exact thing. Someone copied this. That's like going into class, sitting beside the person who gets F every time and copying up. Anyway, it's always fun. It certainly is. There's also some Greek, by the way, just because we're in Greek, we should be doing some Greek stuff here. So we have some warriors fighting, and then we have this. We're actually going to talk about this one. It says Kaliste, and it means for the most beautiful. It is the apple that led to the Trojan War. Yeah, not that specific. Anyway, basic useful information here, which we know, but bears repeating. So we're Monday, Wednesday, 12 to 1:20, probably in 102. But if we happen to be in 103, that's not a seismic shift. Next door is a one-of that they have scheduled. It got scheduled before we did our shift. And so it probably is now clear for the rest of the tour. My office is in 302. You can come and see me 11 to 12 before class. Actually, I'll be here earlier than that. So if it works out for you that 9 or 10, I'll be sitting there. Or if none of that works, you can just, by appointment, let me know. Ancient Greece, I believe, is in the bookstore. When I wrote that, I was assured it was, but now there have been so many other little waves and curves thrown at us. Don't believe everything. But it's under the name Pomeroy when you look it up, which can be a bit of a challenge. I had trouble finding it the first time that they had it in there. Anyway, everything else is on. Yes, there we go. Oh, visual aids. So if you have a book that looks like this, you've got the right book. If it doesn't look like this, then maybe somebody put a different cover on it. But by the way, there is actually a Classical Studies 101 course that's taught out of UBC, and it is completely and utterly different from this one. So there shouldn't be any overlap at all. Anyway, as I say, no change. Something that is near and dear to all our hearts is the assessment part of the thing. So there will be 6 assignments, of which this is the first one, sprinkled throughout, but they're sort of loaded at the beginning of the term, partly because there's the fair warning, and I want you guys to have a decent amount of grading done so that you can you can sort of assess where you are in terms of staying. Hopefully all want to do that. Also, I know that as we get to the end of term, that's when stuff piles up. So you're more likely to have time to do work now, less likely later on. There'll be a midterm. That's going to be a fact-based thing. It's going to be very much like, what is Sasak? What is Sasakthea? That kind of thing. There'll be a long assignment. It's not a term paper. It's actually 2 articles. And I'll just have you read them. They each have a chunk of questions that go with them. Some of them are just content questions. Some of them are reflection questions. And you'll be asked to go and find one other piece that has been written, some article or something like that. So that's what that is. And then the final exam, that will be totally discussion based. So you won't be asked for any one specific piece of knowledge. You'll be asked to talk about general themes, topics, ideas from which you can draw sort of the piece of knowledge, the fact that you remember that applies to that. So knowing in general the facts, but you won't be specific. Oh, you didn't know that one fact, but you knew this one. Oh, we didn't need that one. I didn't test it. And now we've seen this. You can see the shape of the year. We lose 3 Mondays. So there's actually 3 weeks that are just one day. Won't really affect you guys so much, except to say, yes, I don't have to go to school on Monday. I get it. It's a 3-day weekend, but it made the scheduling fun. Now, first thing here. Here's a little something. Could anyone possibly guess what this article is? It's a piece of pottery, 2-handled. Says Antiochus. Not that that helps. Doesn't even help me. Yeah.
An urn?
It is an urn. It has an incredibly specific purpose. And the hint for the purpose is down at the bottom here. That is actually a hole, and you can see that it has been it's been specially made. It's not like somebody just came and popped hit it with a nail or whatever. It has been sculpted to look exactly like that, very carefully.
Is it meant to be some sort of vessel for pouring, like wine and equivalent drink, or?
Yes, it pours out liquid, not to drink though. This is a very small hole, and water dribbles out of it. It's basically a clock. It's called a clepsydra, which means a water thief. And what it does is, it was particularly used in court so that lawyers, actually not, they didn't have lawyers, advocates did not go on and on forever. They would have a piece of wax in there. It's like, okay, you start, wax comes out. When the jar is empty, you have finished talking. Because they would do quick cases in a single day. They couldn't allow for filibustering. So anyway, kind of a neat little article. We always think of sand through the hourglass, but now we've got water. All right. Now you guys, what do you have, and does anybody have in their mind when you say ancient Greece, an image that pops in their heads?
The Greek pantheon?
Yeah?
Phalanx?
Okay, yes. Spartans.
Trojan War?
The Trojan War. That is like you saw this slide and you can't see it. Anybody else have anything that leaps to mind? Well, this is it. You might think, this is actually from the movie Troy with Brad Pitt as Achilles, which he totally nailed it, by the way. We'll talk about that in the Iliad. You might think the Olympic rings. There's the full Acropolis where you can see the height. You might think either pottery or symposia or just flowing garments. Or you might even think the Greek key design. You might think sculpture, or you might think the 300. I love that expression. It's such a good way to express outrage in a second. Anyway, yes, especially with a sword. Yeah, you see, Brad Pitt doesn't have rage. He's just like a cool, calculating, killing machine. But the 300 has rage. Anyway, course objectives. So what we're looking at doing, it's an introduction to the Greek world. We get to see its culture, get to see its history, and its thought as expressed in pottery. You're going to see a ton of pottery because I like to allow the Greeks to express themselves. Renaissance art is really good, and there's some really good stuff, and I will pop it in there, particularly when there isn't a piece of pottery that illustrates what I want to show. But it's nice for the Greeks to be able to speak to us directly, but also in literature. Getting a bit of an understanding of the influence of the ancient Greek world on our world, and it crops up in ways that you don't even necessarily think about particularly or realize. It's like, oh yeah, there's a connection there. Sometimes it's a direct connection. Sometimes it's just a universality of the way human beings think. There's one expression, for instance, I don't know if anybody's come across it, Molon Labe, Molonlabe. You can Google it at your leisure. It is an expression that is particularly used by people who lean a little bit more to the right, particularly in the States, for gun rights. And it is come and take it, is what it means. And it is what the Spartans said to the Athenians, to the Persians. It's like, you want our weapons, you come and get them. But it's been now appropriated for another message. Anyway, we're also just going to learn how to read, write, and think in a sort of an academic, analytical way. And we'll be further, this is kind of a holdover from COVID in terms of using remote online platforms. But in this case, it's navigating through Canvas when they let you in. And sometimes it's just furthering our ability to go to tech people and express the problem well enough that they can solve it quickly. Right? We probably won't get into bull jumping, but the Minoans in Crete in 2000 BC, if they didn't do this, they at least pictured people doing this, doing a somersault over a charging bull. And you'll notice there was also a 180 turn just to make it a little more elegant because it's facing in the opposite direction. So it wasn't just a somersault, it was a somersault with a 180. Anyway, individual goals. I'm sure everyone has their own individual goals. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot to tell me what theirs are, but I'll let you know what mine are. To learn something, because I learn something every time. At least I hope I do. I want to help everyone succeed. There's people will always tell you the story. It's like, oh yeah, you get somebody, and it's like it's a brutal course or it's really difficult. The prof says, sitting there where you are, look to the person to your right, look to the person to your left. By the end, halfway through this course, one of you won't be here anymore because you will have dropped it. And it's said with pride. I don't see that myself. I want to see people succeed. I want to share my interest and knowledge of classical Greece and share all kinds of lovely images. In this case, we have a pottery image of basically a PE class. It's more than that. It's training for an Olympic-style event. So you can see somebody's got a discus. There's a couple of guys wrestling. This one's pounding the seeds out of somebody else. And do we have somebody carrying? There's a coach there somewhere. Yes. This person here is holding a rod. And coaching back in the ancient Greek world was, if you're doing it wrong, I'm going to hit you until you do it right. And that was how referees worked. If you were cheating in wrestling, the referee would just hit you until you stopped doing that. There wasn't anything like break it up or anything like that. Anyway. Organization, 2 classes a week. Generally speaking, a topic and an author, and they tend to have something to go together. Largely lecture-oriented, but I want to give you guys a chance, particularly when we get to lectures, to have some input. And then part of I want you guys to be successful is the assessment is created to give different learners, different types of learners, the ability to find, okay, this is an avenue that I'm very comfortable with. This is how I can express myself most clearly. That's why there's some knowledge based, there's some discussion based. I just a little anecdote. I had one student, and she had an emergency on the day of the final exam, so she couldn't make it. So we talked about, it's like, okay, how can we do something to give you a chance to do that rather than just prorating the mark? So I offered her the possibility of doing an oral exam. And she was fine with that. Okay, that's good. So we did all the organization of it. There's a bit more setup. You have someone else in the room as an observer, all that kind of stuff. It turned out that that couldn't have worked out better because, and she had no idea that I was going to suggest that because it was kind of off the wall. She was brilliant. She was very quiet normally, but she was brilliant. Well, it turned out she'd actually done stand-up. And she really enjoyed talking and kind of performing. So I'm very open to the possibility that there may be avenues to do assessment where people get to demonstrate what they do. Some ground rules. There is something in this course that could offend pretty much anyone. Now, I'm not saying that we're, when I mention stuff, you'll think, oh, that's really offensive. Well, that's not, but everyone has their different comfort zones. But I feel that unlike calculus, for instance, which may be offensive to everyone, but you might find the whole thing, but there's nothing inherently offensive about calculus. But here we're going to see nudity. We're going to see slavery. So dealing with that concept, we're going to see bisexuality. Again, somebody might say, wait a minute, that's not offensive. For some people, it might be. We're going to see violence. We're going to see democracy, but a democracy that does not include women, slaves, foreigners. So a very narrow definition of democracy. And we're going to see demagogues. Okay, maybe it won't be that offensive, but we'll see demagoguery existing 2,500 years ago, how that plays out, how it was, how those individuals used the power they had over to promote an idea, and how they were treated sometimes. Anyway, it's all about reading and thinking. Ground rules number 2, read the material. It's not really a rule because I can't force you, but you'll get more out of class if you're able to keep up with the readings. Be prepared to question, be prepared to bring your thoughts in. And I can't say this enough, and I repeat this excessively, because I know my daughter who's at Langara, she hates going to the prof. Absolutely. And I know it's like, oh, just email the prof, ask them such and such. They'll be happy you asked. No, they're not like you. But talk to me about it. That way I know that there's something that you're dealing with, and we can work things out. We can make something good happen. And I'm accessible, very accessible. And the other thing is be aware of biases. That's one thing we'll learn a lot of, is being aware of biases, including mine. Like right now already, without really thinking about it, I have subjected you to my bias because, for instance, I could have put anything here, but I chose this image. I chose images very specifically, and I'm now creating a very specific narrative. By the way, the main reason I picked the images, just so that you know, is I want you to see a variety of the types of things we're going to see and the types of things that the Greeks put out. But there are also things that it's like, oh, I think that's a really good illustration of Greek art. I think this is a really good illustration of 6th century BC sculpture. And third and finally, there are no silly questions. I mean, people will say, oh, I know this is a dumb question. It's like, no, it's not, but please ask it. So there is no such thing. Being open-minded, obviously we're going to have a good, respectful environment where people can feel free to say what they are comfortable saying. And question everything you hear, question everything you read, and I am part of everything. So feel free to question me. It's like, really? And if I feel confident in what I'm saying, I have no qualms about explaining why I said it. And you might catch Yeah, you're right. That's bull. Anyway, and here we have, now this is Renaissance art. Socrates, if you're familiar with him, he was tried, convicted, and his execution was to drink hemlock. So the tag that I added in there now makes more sense. Yes, if you're struggling, talk to me. So, like I say, 6 short assignments, multiple purposes. They're doing very well. Preparation, I've mentioned that. They're due the following week, and then the long assignment is about reading and discussing what you've read. It's kind of like a warm-up towards doing a term paper. Assignments, so rather than posting them, just email them to me. And because I'm emailing you guys regularly, you'll have my email. I won't, by the way, abuse that and email you guys like every day, because you guys are going to be inundated with stuff. And it's just like, I know when I look at my emails, 50, really? So I'm going to be, it'll just be once a week. It will likely be like Thursday after the 2 classes, just, okay, this is what we're going to do next week kind of thing. Might not be till Sunday, but it's sort of any questions about that last week? Here's what's happening this week. So yeah, you just email me the assignments. If you type them up, that's great. If you write them and scan them or photograph them, like anything like that is fine, as long as I can read it. I might come back to you and say, I don't have the ability to open that file, or it was tiny, can you resend it bigger? But other than that, it's only technology that will stop us. There's somebody working on a laptop. By the way, this is like used tons. Now that people have laptops, this is like one of the most popular images to use from the ancient world. What it is it is a wooden frame, and inside it is a layer of wax. And you just, this is like just a metal stick, and you just write in the wax. It's the ancient equivalent of a chalkboard or a dry erase, because you can write it all out, and then it's like, oh, don't need that anymore. And the back side of this, it's not artist license. That actually is flatter. So it's a wide, flat thing like that, and that's just smooth the wax over. That's the eraser. Start up again. Very sustainable. All right, any questions about that? Because now we'll do actual content.
Can you translate the "it's all Greek to me" into Latin? It's a very specific question, but I can't remember the whole saying. It knew something Greco.
I could translate it, but I'm not sure if it would be the phrase that's well known.
Okay.
It's like,
it knew something Greco-Romanesque.
yeah, there'd be mihi in there somewhere, because that's the to me part. I can't remember. All right. So, first failure. Anyway, first thing we want to do is we have to wrap our heads around Greek. We luckily don't have to read Greek. We don't even have to know the Greek alphabet. But you will see Greek in pottery, and you'll see it in the backgrounds. So just knowing it's there. By the way, here we've got an example of all caps is what's in the inscription in stone. The writing is all in lowercase. You can see handwriting. Yeah, it's not just me. It's not too scary. A lot of the letter forms look like English letter forms. Some of the letters are letters that don't exist particularly. What I'm interested in is this. So the Greeks wrote a bunch of Greek. The Romans come along and they Latinize it. So there's a bit of a shift there in terms of some spelling, in terms of some pronunciation, because there are some Greek words that freak the Romans out, so they repronounce them. Kind of like what is the famous Catholic school, university in the States that has a great football program?
Notre Dame?
It is. Now, no French person would ever say Notre Dame, right? That just got repronounced, Notre Dame. But if you go to France or you go to Paris and you go to the cathedral, it's not the Cathedral of Notre Dame. That would be a football stadium. Anyway, so you're going to see alternate spelling. This is the main thing. You're going to see alternate spellings for the same thing. And sometimes you're like, is that actually the same word or is it two different words? So kaimon, K's become C's, for instance. I's in Latin and Greek become J's in English. So it's Jason, you'll see Jason. For Athena, you might say Athene. Hephaestus, Hephaestos. So far, we're not too radical here. But Achilles is actually Achilles. And purists writing down Achilles' name will write it with a K and EU at the end. Aeschylus. But you can see, by the way, I'm getting to the ones that are more and more bouffé. The Romans just didn't like the word Heracles, so they said Hercules. Yeah.
Is this CLST?
Yes, it is. Grab a box seat. Odysseus became Ulysses. And so now we're not just changing a letter here or a couple of letters there. We're changing the word violently. The worst one is Polydeuces in Greek becomes Pollux in Latin. Anyway, and then here's one, all caps and lowercase, and it's Alcibiades. We'll get to meet Alcibiades. He's a great guy. Very, very interesting character. If you were to go to a modern Greek and show him that and say, oh, who's that guy at the bottom there? He would say, I'm not lying, Alcibiades. And I mean, it took me several times hearing that, and I was like, who? Oh, it's the same guy. Yeah. So anyway, be aware. And if you think, oh, is this? Are these the same people? You can always check with me. Right? Good question to ask. Don't, having said Alcibiades, don't worry about pronunciation. We say Alcibiades, Achilles, but no one's going to laugh if you say Achaeans. Hercules, Aphrodite, Aeschylus, Euripides. Lots of E. That's a safe sound to make when you're pronouncing vowels in ancient Greek. It's Euripides. Not, you might, now somebody in the class might say Euripides. That's actually legitimate. The other people might wonder what you're talking about, but it's a trend. And Eumenides. All right. Anything about reading the stuff, pronouncing the stuff? A little thing about cultural versus literal translation. Now, we're obviously just reading the English, but it's just being aware of how the translator navigates through their translation, just to kind of be aware of it. There's a Latin expression. It's ab ovo ad malum. That expression actually exists in English, but how you translate it will determine whether people understand what you're talking about or not. It literally means from egg to apple. Now, having said that, can anyone guess what the meaning of that phrase is? Like the thought that's being presented? Okay, that's what I would expect, unless you were like a a Roman cultural historian or a Latinist.
It gets better and better.
Yeah, you see, that makes, So that is the literal translation of that phrase. It is completely meaningless. So another way to phrase it is from soup to nuts. Now, does anyone know what that means? Now, 100 years ago, if I say, oh, ad ovo ad malum to anybody, I say it means, for us it means from soup to nuts. The person would, oh yeah, I know what you mean. That still is meaningless because although it's in English, it's translated the thought into a thought that we can relate to. It's a thought that we could relate to 100 years ago and we can't anymore. It means from A to Z, from beginning to end. It is based on the fact that in a formal Roman meal, the first dish was egg and the last thing you ate was apple. The full thing. It used to be that formal English dining, particularly English dining, not Italian or Swedish, you started with soup as the very first thing and the last thing you ate was nuts. So 100 years ago, if you were an Englishman, that made total sense. Now we don't. Right? I can't remember the last time I had nuts for dinner. So, so when we're reading stuff, it probably, if it's a good translation, if it's interesting to read, it will undoubtedly not be literal. And if there are phrases used where it's like, what does that mean? It's probably an English translation that's old enough that what used to be a common expression isn't anymore. So to me, translations have to be done on a regular basis. They have to be updated so that people can understand them with regularly used expressions. Another one, this is where a cultural translation can bump into something that has happened since and trip over it. So amor patriae typically is described as love of country. My favorite translation for it is patriotism. It totally expresses the thought that the Romans are expressing when they use that phrase. It's not just love of country, it is a loyalty. There is a my country first attitude. It is very patriotic minded. You could also describe it as nationalism. You could use that to translate it. If you translate it absolutely literally, it means love of the fatherland. Okay, that has taken on meaning that was never there in the ancient world, but as soon as you say that, you can't unhear all of the implications that fatherland means now. So although it's completely literal, it's also completely useless. So anyway, just a little sneak peek into translations because we will be totally working off of translations. The last thing is BC and AD. You might be lucky and have no problem with this. And bless you, and you can explain it to me. I always have to stop and actually think this out in the same way that I have to stop when someone says left and do that. So we do BCE and CE, or BC and AD. The ancient world, every city-state identified the year by whoever was in power. So, now we would be saying if the Greeks would expect us to say, in the third year of the presidency of Joe Biden, right? Or in the, what is it now, sixth or seventh year of the prime ministership of Pierre Justin Trudeau. That was how they would tell you when this is happening, in the year that this person was the leader. And in Athens, and we're going to talk a ton about Athens, in Athens, they actually had an archon. They had a number of leaders. Archon just means leader. One of them was the head, and he was often referred to as the eponymous archon. Eponymous just means you give your name to something. So the archon that was going to that year was named after. So Timarchides. When Timarchides was archon, Oh yeah, I remember that. That was like 6 years ago. Actually, it's a little more than 6 years ago. Oh, and I should point out something. The Greek calendar and the calendar we use, the Gregorian calendar that we use, do not match. They do not have the same start and end point. So if I talk about an entire year, it's like this happened in this year, I will be using this doubling because it was basically what we were, if we go back and say, when did 476 begin and end, and when did 447 and then 446, that year when he was Archon covers the back half of one and the first half of the other. It's kind of a fussy thing. It's not really going to be particularly relevant that we know the exact half year, but it might occasionally. Eventually, the Greeks had a single point, and it was the Olympiad. They would say in the third year of the 37th Olympiad, and they knew exactly what that was. And everybody was involved. Everybody either not took part, but all cities had people taking part in the Olympics. So it was the one thing that they all agreed on, that they all shared in common. We use the birth of Jesus. Used to be BC and AD. Now it is BCE and CE. So it's before the Common Era and the Common Era. Again, you're going to see both in textbooks, stuff we read, based on when it was written, and again, the bias of the writer. So just be aware of both. So there's a timeline, right? Starting 776 BC, very first Olympic Games. So this is it. 776 is the first year of the first Olympiad. 775 is the second year of the first Olympiad. We're not going to count by Olympiads, by the way. That would be mean. But there's sort of an example. You can see a timeline. Now, this is an obvious question, but in terms of the direction that the numbers go, what do you see? Yeah.
BC increases as you go further backwards, and AD increases as you go forward.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So if I am in BC and I start describing things chronologically, the numbers are going to get smaller. Of course, if you don't do that very often, when you describe things going along chronologically, you expect the number to get bigger all the time, and it's kind of locked into our brains. So I will have to stop and think 450, oh, that's after 460, not before. And it's easy to trip on that.
It's like negative numbers on the number line.
It is. There's BC. Yeah, exactly. BCE is, you could think of, that's a good one. Think of it as a negative. Yeah. Like I say, it kind of gets interesting when we start walking backwards. So like I say, 460 happened before 450. And then just the century, because like which century are we in now?
21st.
We're in the 21st century, but it's not 21, right? It's 20. It's the same thing in the opposite direction. The 400s BC are the 5th century BC, and they start at 499. This is the one, though, it's like, yeah, okay, I totally get that. You don't need to explain it anymore. But when I see early 5th century BC, my brain still wants to say 420, 410, and it's not. Early 5th century is actually when the numbers are bigger. It's like 490. The Persian invasion of Greece happened in the early 5th century. The Greeks defeat, the spoiler alert, the Greeks defeat by the Spartans happened in the late 5th century. Yeah. Middle is easy. That's never going to change. But early and late, it's just sometimes you have to stop and catch yourself. It'll all become fairly quickly. It'll become automatic. But yeah, the coup d'etat in Athens happens in late 5th century. The Eumenides is performed in Athens in the mid-5th century, and Marathon was fought in the early 5th century. All right. Any questions? This is a really good map. It kind of shows it specifically shows what happened just before the Peloponnesian War in the mid 5th century BC. But it's got a lot of very useful place names that we are going to bump into. So that's why some of these things, if I think they're really useful, I will include them in multiple presentations. So